Welcome back to the first edition of the podcast in 2026. Happy New Year to everyone and welcome back. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paul Franklin. Paul, firstly, how are you doing?
Yeah, well, good, thanks, mate. Happy New Year to you and everyone who's listening or viewing this. It's another year gone by. It flies by, mate. And we had a good Christmas. Did you have a good Christmas?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad at all, to be fair. I know just before Christmas as well, which were pretty good. I were surprised with tickets to go see the darts, which I know you did as well. And, you know, I do have to apologise, I think, for the break as well, with no podcasts. With university, it's nothing serious. It was just a bit stressful. And to be honest, I just wanted a bit of a break from everything. And I've had a pretty good break, to be honest. And I'm ready to come back to producing content on the National League, and I'm delighted to say that you're joining me tonight. And tonight we're going to be doing some National League predictions, mid-season predictions, aren't we?
Yeah. We'll have a look. I think we've discussed off air, and we've talked about this on a number of different occasions, Luke, in relation to where we see the teams, and I think we've all agreed, or we both agreed rather, and discussions over the last few weeks have been in that very much that top seven almost seem to be pulling away. Maybe one or two might breach that. But, the bottom four is slightly more interesting. I think you could go right up to mid-table, and we'll talk about it more. But, you know, there's some teams down there that are really struggling. But I think, you know, the fact that we've got to sort of halfway, it's the January transfer window. I know there's not such a thing in National League, but we have that type of thing with the EFL and the Premier League loan players and everything else coming in. It's going to be interesting just to see where we sit with the top seven and that bottom four. Really, I think that middle section is what it is. So there's some that aren't going to harm either end, but there is a few that could drop more than go up.
Yeah, I think that's what's quite interesting, you know, this season, actually looking at it. And it's very rare, I feel, but there's a lot of sides at the moment. It feels like their season's kind of fizzling out because there's no real feel of them dropping into a relegation battle of such, unless they have a major drop-off in this second half of the season. But because of how well the top seven are performing, it doesn't feel like they've got the potential to be able to cause them any issues too. And I think that's why we've kind of made the decision to not do a full 1 to 24. We're going to go over bottom four. We're going to speak about sides that we feel may survive and why they will. And then we're going to go on a top seven as well. But we're not going to do like a full on 1 to 24 because we don't think there's not enough to talk about, but we can't see much changing when I look at certain clubs here. And of course, we will come on to talk about that too. But I think with any further ado, we should start with the bottom four. So we'll go with 24th place then. And I found the bottom four very difficult. I went for Gateshead. Who did you go for?
Yeah, I've gone for Gateshead as well. They're in a wretched run of form. They've got Rob Elliott back. I think, you know, they didn't know really where to turn, did they? Alan Armstrong tried his very best to do the job he did. And unfortunately, Gateshead are going to be victims of their own success, Luke. We've talked about this on a number of occasions over the last few seasons. They can't keep losing managers, losing players, losing loan recalls, you know, that type of thing, and continue to punch above their weight. You know, they've seen the crowds diminish. You know, that's going to affect the budget. They're probably not playing the attractive type of football that they were known for, you know, under previous managers, including Rob Elliott. And I think the only thing that gives them that little bit of hope is him coming back with Louis Story, who's moved back up north from Dorking after his short-term contract, to try and steady the ship, really. But, you know, 19 points. Who would have said that Gateshead would have been bottom of the league at Christmas, Luke? I think we were both kind of looking at this going, they could be a team that struggles, but they have really sort of plummeted. And it's hard to get out of that vein of form and that rut. Even if a new manager comes in, I think that's the only hope they've got. And I know they've made a couple of signings, so, you know, it's more positive for them. They might get a few bodies back through the door to watch them and get behind the team. But I think it's going to be a tough half of the season for them. And they may claw from 24th, but I can't see them clawing out the bottom four.
I don't think the squad's actually built to be involved in a relegation battle, if I'm being honest. It feels like, particularly under the previous manager, and I think it will be the same under Rob Elliott, it feels like they're trying to stick with, I suppose, the Gateshead way of, possession-based football, passing out from the back. And it's cost them a lot of matches this season. The amount of mistakes that have led to goals, it's cost them on a number of occasions in matches so far this season. And I think with the players they've got, they're going to try to do the same again in this second half of the season. And for me, I suppose what's crucial is that they may reconsider and look to adapt. Of course, Rob Elliott's come in, did an excellent job when he was previously at Gateshead. But, it's a very different team to that. And a lot of the key players have moved on. He didn't get off to the best start either, away at Tamworth, who Tamworth themselves have been on quite poor form and, were beaten there by 3-1. Coming up, they've got Southend away, Rochdale at home. And we speak about a new manager bounce being crucial. It's not the best run of fixtures, I think, to try get a new manager balance when you've got Southend away from home, and Rochdale at home as well, who are looking to, go on to try and win the league this season themselves. January as well, I think it's a time that, as for a club like Gateshead, they always fear every season. The squad gets raided. And although so far this season, I think they've been, particularly poor compared to previous years, I still think there's one or two individuals there that, sides with bigger budgets will be looking at. Kian Adams won, he scored 10 goals this season. A lot of key goals as well for Gateshead. Too, still very young himself. I think a lot of sides will be looking at him. And, Teenan Brooks, the goalkeeper as well, has probably been one of the standouts in goal this season. He could be someone that, people are looking at. And, I know people will come out and say, well, they're under contract at Gateshead. But, if a club comes in, the players can, I feel, at this level often force a move, if that makes sense. And I could see the same thing happening with Gateshead. And I do fear the worst for them at the moment, if I'm being honest.
No, 100%. They've got to stop this slide. And there's a couple of teams we can talk about, but when you're losing to Truro and you're losing to Tamworth, as a Wealdstone fan, we often talk with fellow fans around that sort of mini league at the bottom, trying to beat the teams around you. Aspirationally, you want to try and beat the teams in the top 7, top 10, top half. And they're your bonus points, really. But you want to be beating teams in and around you. They've lost to Sutton, they've lost to Tamworth. They're not picking up the results they used to pick up in the last couple of seasons against those top teams and those favoured teams as well. Gateshead were always one of those teams that would go and upset the apple cart and win a few games against the so-called stronger teams in the league, and it's just not happened for them this year. So I think they're going to struggle. I think you're right in terms of any team in that bottom 4 to 10, really, Luke, is players, again, their aspirations are to play as a higher level as they can. Some do go for money and drop down, etc. And there's circumstances why they do that. But the majority of players want to play at the best level they can. And if the likes of Gateshead, Truro, Morecambe, Brackley, even likes of Wealdstone or Tamworth are starting to look like they're going to slide or drop any of their prized assets, one, I think you're right, individually they'll not force to move, but they'll want to move. Mm-hmm. And clubs may want to cash in and go, well, we're going to drop into the regional leagues. Can we afford to keep those players? Can we get a bit of cash for them? That type of thing. So you're right. I think those bottom teams could suffer from some of their better players being cherry picked. We'll have to wait and see if that happens, but I think that's a valid point and worth considering and looking at. Especially in the next few weeks.
I think on the other side as well, you mentioned the victims of their own success. I think that could be key in terms of actually being able to recruit players now. Now, because of the last couple of seasons, I actually think that the fan base probably has a higher expectation than what maybe Gateshead should. I don't think they should be in a relegation battle, but based on budgets, they've not got one of the best yet. I think Gateshead fans themselves, I think like any fan base when they've done well in the previous 2 years. They want to see them being able to kick on again and being able to compete for the playoffs again. Of course, they're well off that at the moment. They've got bigger things to be concerned about. But what I will say is when you speak about that, that means the overall atmosphere. I think when you compare a Gateshead to sides around them, like Braintree potentially, who expected to be in a relegation battle, they knew probably they'd be in this position come the mid season. That's it. That's the same when you're trying to recruit players as well. Players will be coming into Braintree knowing that the fan base's expectations are to survive. I think when it's harder for Gateshead to probably recruit players now because it's such a low atmosphere. I think the fan base themselves are very disappointed and underwhelmed with the start of the season. I can't imagine the dressing room being a very pleasant place. There's a lot of still quite big characters in there that wouldn't have wanted to be in this position at the moment. And I think, for players that are looking to come into a club at the moment, I don't think Gateshead's the type of environment that, for me, particularly as a young and proven player, I'd want to be going into. I think I'd much rather go to somewhere like Truro, Braintree, where it feels like there's more of a togetherness that, we can get out of this position. And I think with Gateshead, although they've appointed Rob Elliott, I just think with the squad overall and the whole situation then and the drop-off in crowds, I really do fear the worst for them. And I think that's why after the green, I've gone 24th. Moving on to 23rd place then. This is where I think it gets a lot harder for me at the moment. I think the whole bottom four are, but who've you gone for in 23rd first?
I've gone for the improving Truro City. Just going to be a step too far. They've been in that bottom four since almost the beginning, if not the beginning of the season, Luke, and I can't see that changing. They've just brought in Harry Charsley from Oldham, which is a great sign. It goes to show that they're capable of attracting footballers to go and play in Cornwall. Whether it's the full time, the new ground, whether there's a bit of funding there. The salaries that they're paying are decent for that. But to get Harry Charsley, who I believe has just been a little bit injury prone down up at Oldham and has played probably his best football at National League level rather than in that League Two. So getting Sean Donnellan on a permanent from Livingston goes to show that John Askey can attract players, and Truro as a football club can attract players. But I saw them beat Wealdstone, and they were okay. And I'm not being sort of bitter around the fact they beat Wealdstone. Wealdstone were terrible, and Truro did enough to win the game, and probably could have won more comfortably. But they certainly didn't look like they were going to start to sort of really ramp up wins. And obviously they went to York and got easily beaten, which is no disgrace. But yeah, I think they're just going to struggle. And have we talked about them coming up maybe a season too early? Will they be better prepared if they go down to the National League South next year, which is going to be a tough league? Sort of build from there and then come back up, and they'll be better positioned to then maybe consolidate. But they've got a good manager. They've got a nice new stadium. They've obviously got some good funding and backing and seem like a well-organised club. I think it's just probably that step too far a little bit at the moment, but that's not to say they won't be back, but I think they will go down this year.
Yeah, I think for a side like Truro, it was always going to be an uphill battle, I thought, them getting promoted into the National League, particularly they've never been in this division before. It's a really hard place to recruit players. For me in 23rd, I've actually gone for a different one. I've slightly changed it up. I've gone for Braintree. And at the moment, it might look like a bit of an outside shot, but they've scored 19 goals all season. I think the second lowest goal scorers. They've got a very thin squad as well, and one of the lowest in the division. If injuries kick in for them, that'll make them even weaker. I don't particularly think they've got, much of a budget to be able to go out there and, bring in players that are up to National League standards. They've really tried to find this goal scorer, which does feel like that missing piece for them. And the players that are coming in, the strikers, the Otayers who are coming in, the Walker, who they signed who they signed in the summer from Woking, they're not being prolific, and that does feel like what's missing from Braintree. And I still don't think they're going to be able to find that, in my opinion. Like I've mentioned, a very thin squad. You knew they were going to be down there at the start of the season, and I did predict them to go down, and I'm still sticking by that now. I think if you look at some of the sides around them, which I will come on to, there's a lot of sides that are down there that, on paper shouldn't be down there with the actual squad they've got, the depth they've got, the budget to be able to go out and recruit players. And I think in this second half of the season, we're going to see that come into action in terms of, the probably improvement in those sides and how the smaller sides in the division become weaker. And I think Braintree could be one of those sides, in my opinion, and that is why I've got them to go down in 23rd place. 22nd place then, who have you gone for?
Morecambe. Now, I think at the beginning of the season, Luke, I think we were all in agreement that Morecambe were going to go down if they were to start. Obviously, if they weren't to start the league, then they would have been dispelled anyway. But knowing that they were potentially going to start the league campaign, but it was going to be delayed and we didn't know who the manager was and how many players they had, I don't think anyone would be surprised if any particular blogger, pundit, National League enthusiast looked at it and went, well, Morecambe are going to go down. And we were all celebrating the fact that at least they have a football club to cheer on and support. They then bring in a manager who is unknown at this level, he's unproven at this level, but full of enthusiasm, full of, on paper, the right ideas of how to play. But I think what was more surprising is who they could recruit. Now, on paper, who they've recruited, it looks like a decent National League squad on the whole. And yes, I know, their manager has sort of come out in the public arena and said, well, I had to go and get them. There was no pre-season. I had to get free agents off the PFA and da. But he's still claiming, free agents out of that market who are looking decent enough at that level. And then I think we've spoken about his naivety in terms of how he sets his team up. They were fun to sort of watch and talk about because they were winning 5-4 and losing 3-4-3, and like the likes of the Wealdstone game, they were 3-1 down and drew 1-4-3 after going to 3-all. Sorry, 3-1 up, then it went to 3-all and then 1-4-3. Yeah, they were fun to talk about, but they clearly weren't picking up the results that maybe was expected off the back of who they had signed. And I think the frustration that we may have showed when we talked about it, Luke, was the fact that I don't think he really knew who his best 11 was. He didn't know, where to play these players. He kept mixing them around. They were obviously making mistakes and not doing what was expected of them, which, to a point we could understand that because they didn't have a pre-season. They were on the back foot. They were having to sort of pick up as they went along. But we're now halfway through the season, Luke, and they've, apart from maybe picking up a couple of results in the last month, they're still way behind the 8 ball in terms of trying to get out. And their manager will sit there and he'll wax lyrical about how they're going to be the best team in the National League. And no. You've got to prove it. And at the moment, they're not. And I don't think having him as the manager, the naivety he has shown in that first half is going to improve enough for them to get safety.
So I'm guessing that you'd probably make a change. And if there was to be a change, do you think that most managers would be able to keep this Morecambe side up?
I think there's a fair chance, only because they're not completely marooned at the bottom. Yes, you've got to look at the fact that they started late. They have played catch up. They've now caught up, and they're up. Just look at the league now. They're on 20 points, so they're only one or two wins away, depending on other results, of getting out of that bottom 4. So that they have shown improvement, and you've got to give them that. They've shown improvement, but I think you're right. I think I couldn't say who it was, but another manager may just get a tune out of these players and be a bit more pragmatic in their approach in terms of trying to win football matches and not trying to think, well, I'm going to outscore you, because that just doesn't work. We've seen it from the Premier League down. The likes of Ozzy Ardele's back in the 90s. You got Ange Postecoglou recently. that philosophy, unless you're Pep Guardiola and you've got the likes of Haaland up top, it's not going to work. You've got to be a bit more pragmatic and understand the league and understand the players. And I don't think he's adapted enough to that to put them in the best position to stay up. Another manager may do that.
22nd place for me then. I have gone for Truro. John Askey as manager, I think he's great. I just think that potentially this has come at maybe not too soon, but I think it's always going to be a massive uphill battle for a side like Truro to, adjust to the National League. They've never been in this league in the past. A lot of the players hadn't played in this league. I think the one major, I suppose, positive about them coming into this season, which may have made a lot of people think that there is a chance that they could survive, is them having a very well-respected and experienced National League manager in John Askey, who knows the division like the back of his hand. But I just feel like there's not many managers out there that I think will be able to keep Truro up when you consider where they're positioned in the country. I think recruitment-wise, they've done probably the best they can, and a lot of that will be down to John Askey going to play for someone like him as well. But it's a very difficult job, I think, to be able to keep a side like Truro up. It's probably the toughest thing they've ever had to do. And if we look at them so far this season, I think they've been competitive in the National League, but I felt this first half of the season for a club like Truro was going to be crucial. I think they needed to probably have a better start to the season than what they have. So far, a lot of people were saying they're in a very good chance of surviving, which they are. But as I've previously mentioned, some of the sides around them, I think, will get stronger as the season goes on. And I think when you look at Truro as a football club, where they are, they're not a side for me that are going to be able to recruit very experienced National League players. We've seen them bring in Charsley today, who's come from Oldham. A good player, a good individual, yes, but he's very injury prone. There's a reason he's gone to Truro and he's not in, League Two now or a better National League side in a better position. And that's because he's got an awful injury record as well. So for me, I do look at Truro and I just think this second half of the season is going to be a very uphill battle, I think, overall. I think it'll get a lot tougher. They haven't won away from home all season yet in the first half of the season. And so they're very reliant on that home form. And if we actually look at the second half of the season in terms of the home form fixtures, they've still got to play 4 of the top 7, which I think includes the likes of Boreham Wood, Forest Green. I think Carlisle's in there as well. For me, overall, that's not a nice set of home fixtures within that top 7. And I think it's going to be a very uphill battle for them to survive this season, which I think we knew it was going to be at the start. 21st place then, the final relegation spot. Who have you gone for?
This was probably the hardest one to predict out of what we're doing, the 11 that we're doing. I've gone with Brackley Town. Now, similar to what you talked about, Braintree, the goal scoring is a challenge. Brackley are part-time. It's their first season here. Listen, they picked up a couple of wins in the last couple of games, which is great for them because, they would be even further sort of towards that bottom end. But I just looked at this when there's got to be a team that will drop. I think we will agree, Sutton United with the new manager, with a bit of stability, with some of the players they signed, will be okay. They're not in a false position because the league doesn't lie after however many games. But I think they're better equipped with that game in hand or 2 games in hand over teams around them. They're just that slightly better equipped maybe to get out of it, although their form hasn't been great in the last 3 games. I think Aldershot have now turned a corner under John Coleman. You look at them and how they're doing. They did very well the other night and beat Wealdstone 4-1, which is a game they needed to win. When you're near the bottom. So, I looked at the likes of Altrincham, their wretched run of form at the moment. I looked at Wealdstone, their run of form at the moment. I think they've just done enough in the first half of the season to build enough points. So if they're going to have a tougher second part, that they're not going to drop in. That's not to say they won't drop in, but I can't see it. Whereas, Brackley being part-time, being new, can they attract the players? Can they attract players like Truro have attracted? I would suggest they probably can't, and that's no disrespect to Brackley. I don't suppose their budget's huge and they can have big squad numbers. So that's my gut feel that one of those teams will drop, and I think it will probably be them.
I've gone for my final spot. I've gone for Boston to go down, which might be a bit of a rogue one, particularly when you've got someone like Graham Coughlin and, the way he kept his side up there last season. But, so far this season, I think for them, they're sitting in 18th at the moment. They've had one win in 10. I don't think they've actually won at home since September. Which is particularly, quite concerning, I feel, when you look at them at the moment. They haven't particularly scored too many goals, and defensively, I think in both boxes they've looked pretty poor. And, we speak about sides slipping into the drop zone when they haven't really threatened all season, which I don't think they have. I don't think they've been in the bottom four yet this season. For me, the second half of the season could be a tough one for them. Everyone knows it now. I've got the likes of Sutton and Morecambe and even Aldershot who are flirting with the drop zone to survive. And I think because those sides, I feel, their sides, I think, will only get better as the season goes on. Sutton are probably able to recruit good quality players. They've already had a change in manager. Morecambe themselves, I'll come on to them shortly in a bit more detail, but that squad should not be down there. And surely at some point, they've got to improve. And even Aldershot, I think they know what this league's about. They've been in this position a number of times. I don't think Boston particularly have. Last season, they were in the drop zone and there was no pressure on them, I don't feel, to go on to survive. This season, they kind of is. And I actually think overall they're a little bit weaker than what they were last season when you look at some of the players they lost in the summer and some of the recruitment. And I found it hard because, you look at the likes of Brackley as well, but, don't score many goals at all, only 18 goals themselves all season, but defensively, they're a lot better than Boston. And I think, you look at the likes of Boston, Brackley, Braintree, Truro, they're the sides for me that I think are going to be in the thick of it in a bit of a mini league themselves to survive. I've got confidence that the Aldershots, the Suttons, the Morecambes will get the job done. And I am going to have Boston to finish in the bottom four, which does mean, as I've mentioned, the sides that I think will survive, who are currently in the bottom four, are Morecambe and Sutton. The only side you've got to survive currently is Sutton.
Yeah, I was surprised that they dropped as much as they did, and that clearly they changed their manager and turned a few players over, and they're going to be ups and downs. That a new manager, he's not experienced at this level, but that's not to say that he's not capable. You look at the Halifax managers come in from Kings Lynn's done very, very well. You look at Sam Cox up to this point has done very well. Wealdstone, there is examples of managers. Luke Garrard to a point, some years ago, Boreham Wood, and I know he's now got the experience, but you can go and get these managers from lower levels, and they will do well. Some, not all of them, but some will. And I think he's one of those managers that looks like he will adapt to it. Whereas you look at the Morecambe manager, may struggle a little bit more. So I just think Sutton, you will get variable results with them because of the nature of their squad and their manager situation. But I think they'll be okay. Like Altrincham, not had a great run since they appointed the manager Neil. I can't say his name's gone out of my head. Since Neil was
Gibson.
Neil Gibson. That's it. Apologies, Neil.
Ex-Wealdstone.
Yes, it's Gibbo, ex-Wealdstone manager, was appointed sort of permanently, but I think they'll be okay. You're right, Boston's, the Brackleys, the Wealdstones. When you look at those teams, the fact that then the nature of their setup, their squad sizes, the full-time, part-time argument is always going to go against them when stuff, times get tough. But I just think there was a strong argument for Boston. I completely understand where you're coming from, Luke. I just had to sort of pick one of them, and I thought Brackley might be that full guy, but it could be one of several, as we know.
Yeah, I agree, to be honest. I think, I looked at Brackley. I think for me, there's just something about them. I think being at home, particularly, I think they'll be able to grind out enough results at home, and I think that'll be crucial for them to just about do it. Morecambe's an interesting one for me because I've got very little confidence in that manager, but within the squad itself, the squad, I think, is more than capable to be nowhere near the drop zone. And I just think maybe they'll be able to pull away if they can get a few results together, a bit of, momentum. I think we've seen it so far this season. That's the thing that's lacked with them is they've gone and got a win out of nowhere. Probably won like 3-0, like we've seen at times where they've gone away from home and put 3 or 4 past the side. And then we're thinking, right, they've clicked now. Now we're going to see an improvement from them. And it's back to square one again the following week when they go and get hammered 5-0. You look recently, they've actually competed with the likes of Rochdale's and Carlisle's, only just lost to those. They gave York a very good game. But it's just those fine margins, times where they're just dropping off in individual games that they can't afford to do. And I think if they do cut that out for me within that squad, I think this second half of the season now, they should be able to accumulate enough points to be far away from the drop zone. And I think Morecambe have got to see it as a whole is it's a separate season now. If you want to still play the card of, we started the season late and we couldn't bring in the same players because, as we've mentioned, we didn't get a pre-season. Then fine, you can say that. I think still for this first half of the season, if you'd like, if that's a comfort to the Morecambe manager or an excuse he wants to use, that is fine. But the second half of the season now, how he's got to treat it is there's absolutely no excuses. You've got a January window, which I know doesn't really appeal to the National League, but it is usually when most recruitment happens, where you've got an opportunity to bring in better players than some of the sides around you. You've got a squad now that should be fully fit. Now we're halfway through the season. You've got to see it as a separate season now, the second half of the season, to be able to survive. And I think in the 23 games left or 22 games left, Morecambe should be able to get more than the 50 points required to survive, I feel.
100%. It's going to be interesting because it's going to be a tough 4 months for the next year for that bottom, probably 7 or 8, really. Depending on recruitment, that may ease it a little bit, but these teams do find it hard to recruit as well, Luke, don't they? It's just a natural thing. It's hard to recruit. Whoever you are recruiting, you tend to recruit in blind as much as, are they proven at National League level? Are they being recruited because they've got an injury issue? And are they reliable? If they're a lone player, are they going to adapt? If they're coming from a lower league, are they going to adapt? You're not generally sort of recruiting National League stalwarts, National League standard players that you can rely on. There's going to be a gamble on something. Whereas the top teams, they always say it's best to strengthen when on top. We've not even seen any of the business that they guys have done, but they're pulling players back from loans, everything else. They want to strengthen their squads. They can. So, I think the top 7 is going to be easier, not to predict, but it's easier to choose the top 7 when you look at the league as we stand now compared to that bottom 4.
Finally, just on the relegation battle, let's speak a little bit about the mid-table sides. Is there anyone for you that you could see, maybe not as you've predicted, you've already predicted your bottom 4, but anyone you could see potentially, being involved in a relegation battle come the end of the season, or potentially even slipping through the net? You're looking probably from Altrincham to probably as far as Solihull at the moment, who doesn't feel like they've got much to play for. Maybe you could put a case together for Solihull still wanting the playoffs. But is there any of those sides for you where you feel they could be involved in a relegation battle come the end of the season?
Obviously, close quarters watching Wealdstone. I think they could definitely be in there. Haven't won in 5, haven't really won a game since the FA Trophy. Nicked a few draws. They've done very well to get to 32 points. But when you look at their record, 3 losses, 1 draw and a loss. You look at Altringham's 4 losses on the bounce. Whereas, Woking had done really well. I don't think they'll slide in. I think you've got Eastleigh, I think, are a club that won't harm either end of the table. Yeah. They're going to be comfortably mid-table at this stage. Yeovil's very similar. I think new manager, they brought in another unproven manager. I think they'll get invariable results, but they'll be strong enough in terms of their full-time capacity, etc., to get players. So I really think, looking at maybe Wealdstone, Altrincham, could be those two. Tamworth possibly, but they're another 2 points ahead of Wealdstone and blimey, they're 6 points and 8 points ahead of Brackley as an example. So I think from Wealdstone and Altrincham are the two that I would look at and worry about.
Let's talk about the top 7 then and our predictions for that. Firstly, before we go on to it, is there any change you think within the top 7 where you could see a Halifax, a Hartlepool, or a Solihull, or maybe anyone else you believe that could break in?
No, and purely the reason why I'm just looking at the league now, Luke, is if you look at Southend up, they stay the top 7 apart from Forest Green and Carlisle appear to have played the least amount of games. If you look at Southend, 23, they're already 3 points clear of Halifax with 3 games in hand. They're 4 points ahead of Hartlepool with 2 games in hand. And listen, the old argument, you rather have the points on the board rather than the games in hand. But when you're strong teams like the top 7 are, I don't think that's as much of a challenge. Scunthorpe only played 24, Rochdale only played 22, York only played 24. I mean, you look at where Hartlepool are in 9th at 37 points and Scunthorpe are in 6th at 49. That's a 12-point difference. That's a 4-game turnaround. And when you look at how those top 7 are doing in relation to the wins and the draws and the losses, they're all just, apart from the odd one, they're winning. They're having to win, So I think that top 7 have really pulled away, and that will show more if they take advantage of those games in hand, which they may not. I'm not suggesting they will, but I think they're going to be confident that they can claw enough points to have that top 7 as it is.
I think there'd have to be a major drop-off, it feels, for any of the sides. I think at this point you would say they would have bottled it if none of the top 7 don't finish within the playoff spots, which I think the only thing you'd say about that is it is a shame if it does carry on in the vein that I think a lot of people are expecting it to, that, the top 7 feels like it could potentially be wrapped up. I look at Solihull under Chris Millington. I think they're a lot better than what they were under the previous manager. I think the squad on paper, if the season was to start now, I'd have to have them right in the mix, I feel. But, they're already, 7 points behind Southend, and Southend have got 2 games in hand on them. Hartlepool, recent takeover. We don't really know much about them, the people who've taken over Hartlepool. And are they going to be able to bring in enough players to really put a case together to be able to break into the top 7?
Don't score enough goals, do they?
No, exactly. And, they've probably not got the best out of Alex Reid himself either. And then even Halifax themselves, I think have had a very respectable start to the season. I think in the previous 2 years when they've made it into the playoffs, they were on very similar point tallies to what they are on now, and they were actually in the playoffs in the last 2 seasons, in the mid-seasons position of the league overall. But the top 7 this year, it's not been a case of sides below them not performing. It's been that the top 7 have just been exceptional. 6 of the top 7 are averaging over 2 points per game so far, which means that if it carries on in the way it is doing, which is probably unlikely, there's going to be a drop-off at some point, but they're all going to get over 92 points. Southend are on 41 in the first 23 games, so they're going to be well in the 80s as well. Usually what you need to get in the playoffs is about 70 points, 70 to 74 maybe, to finish 7th or 6th. This season, it feels like you're going to need at least 81, 82 points to actually be in the playoffs, which is ridiculous. And I just don't think Halifax have probably got it in them to be able to get enough points, be able to put a run together, to be able to catch Southend firstly, and then, actually maintain that run as well. And nor do I see a Hartlepool or Solihull either. And, the further you go down, Tamworth, Park Time, I can't see them getting any stronger. And below that, it's definitely too much of an ask for me for any of them to break into the top 7.
No, I think you're right. And if you can analyse it to death, but I've just counted up. There's that top 7 in the last 5 games. There's been 35 games between them. They've lost an average of 1 game each in 5 games. And that might be that they've played each other, So their form is relentless. We've talked about the fact that there isn't a Notts County, a Wrexham, a Chesterfield, that are kicking off and moving away. They are all just winning and winning and winning, and that it must be hugely frustrating for them as a team and as a manager to sort of look at it, come off the pitch at 5 o'clock and go, right, we've just had a really tough win against Brackley and shit, Carlisle have won, Forest Green have won, Rochdale have won. That no team are really giving up. I think the one that surprises me maybe a little bit is Forest Green. They seem to be that little bit more indifferent to some of the others, but they're still well in the mix, and I wouldn't discount them at all. But yeah, it's a good top 7. Some surprising ones in there, I think. Luke, Scunthorpe, very surprising. Boreham Wood, without a shadow of a doubt, very surprising. Fair play to them. Consistency is the key. They found the areas on the pitch that they needed to improve. They've really gone and done that well. I think Scunthorpe have relied a little bit more on loan deals than maybe Boreham would have. But two good footballing teams competing against more of the established National League frontrunners. So, yeah, a good top 7. And what I like about it is that it is so even, and we probably going to talk about this for the next 4 months, and they'll all be chopping and changing. You've only got to look at, say, a 4:45 when you look at the National League table. You may have had 2 or 3 different teams at the top of that table in that one afternoon, just because of the way results are, because it is so tight. So, it's going to be a fun 4 months, I think, because there isn't anyone running away with it. That mid-table may be a little bit more of a slog for people because they're not going to get in and they're not going to drop down. So, yeah, the top 7 are going to be good.
The only thing that interests me, and I still think it's a massive outside shot, is actually maybe and I might be biased here, but Halifax, I think, are the one side that I'd keep an eye on. Probably the only side I feel that could maybe cause Scunthorpe and Southend to feel a little bit nervous in the second half of the season. At the moment, I say that, this is what I mean. The gap between Scunthorpe and Halifax is 11 points, and Scunthorpe have 2 games in hand, which sounds like a ridiculous amount. That could be 17 points come, the end. They've been, Scunthorpe, I'm going to come on to them. They've always been a side that I thought would slip off, and they just haven't. They've been relentless. They've still only lost 3 games all season. Southend, they've got 3 games in hand on Halifax. They're currently 3 points clear. But the thing that interests me when I look at Southend and Scunthorpe, if you look at their next 7 or 8 fixtures, they've got to play a lot of the sides around them. Halifax have got quite a nice run of fixtures. And I know people can come back and say after that, yes, but then after that run of fixtures, Halifax will then have all the tough fixtures later. And yeah, I agree with that. But if Halifax may be back in the mix by then and having that momentum, even against the better sides, towards the end of the season, anything can happen. Like I've said, I still think it's a major outside shot currently at the moment. You even look at Halifax going to Forest Green. They'd got 10 points in the previous 4 games prior to that game. And it still felt like, away to Forest Green, who currently sit 3rd in the National League, it felt like a must-win game to actually cause, Southend any problems or be able to keep up with the top 7. And, they only just lost that. And it's a massive kick in the teeth, I feel, that one overall. But we will come on to the top 7 now. Everyone knows the top 7, the sides that we've picked. But what order? That's the question. 7th place, then. Are you sticking with Southend, or do you think something may change?
No, I'm sticking with Southend. Purely on the basis when you look at between them and Scunthorpe, there's 8 points and only 1 game in hand. I think they're more a chance risk of getting caught by Halifax than maybe pushing on up the league. That's not to say that form won't turn. Luke and Southend or Scunthorpe have a really good run or don't have a good run, and the Forest Green do or Rochdale don't. But I think it's just the fact that they are those few points behind the rest of that top 7, if you like. So I'm going to stick with Southend in 7th place. And listen, that they're going to be the hunted, not the hunters this year. Last year they came up through the almost through the back door right at the last minute. They're going to have to hang on here and try and stay in that top 7 with the likes of Halifax breathing down their necks. Different proposition for them. They are in a different place in terms of their squad and their ownership and the off-field issues. So I think they'll be well placed to do that, and they've got the experience of getting to that playoff final last year, and they won't want that disappointment of losing that again potentially, and that might spur them on. So yeah, Southend in 7th for me.
I've swapped it. I've gone Scunthorpe 7th, which might sound like a bit of a long shot at the moment, particularly when you see the point margin. Of course, an 8-point gap, yet Southend do have a game in hand. We've still got a full set of 23 fixtures to go for Southend, that is. And I think it is a long season. And the thing about Scunthorpe is, and I keep repeating it, and it does keep, coming back to bite me, to be honest, is I do say that, at some point, surely they're going to drop off. And for some reason, I still think they may do at some point. I feel there's got to be a time where Scunthorpe do slip up, and that is because they've got a very, very good starting XI, I feel, overall. I think throughout the whole team, it's very well balanced. They're well coached. They've got a good defence. They've got good individuals going forward that work well together as well, I feel, which is crucial, and probably one of the best midfields in the National League as well. But when you come away from that starting 11, I don't think compared to Southend and all the other sides I've got above them, actually have that depth, or maybe in terms of Southend's case, have the ability to be able to go out and recruit strong depth, I feel, overall with Scunthorpe. They get very good crowds, Scunthorpe, but they don't have a huge budget compared to some of the sides around them. And if any injuries kicked in with any of the individuals that meant that they were out for a while, I could see a bit of a drop-off, I feel, and I don't think they'll be able to bring in the players to recruit it. I think Southend, for me, I'm going to come on to, I think they're going to get stronger because they're going to be able to recruit more players because of the budget they've got. And I think for me, Southend so far haven't been too bad either, to be fair. But yeah, it feels a little harsh. I think I've probably been a bit negative on Scunthorpe all season considering the position, but it's more just how shocked I am that they've been able to keep up with it so far, averaging over 2 points per game. And I think most Scunthorpe fans will probably be liking the fact that they keep proving myself wrong, and they're very well to go on to do that. But I just feel like I can't see them going another 23 games without going on a bad run, because they haven't hit a bad run so far at all. And that's something I think throughout the whole top 7, maybe bar Southend, no side's gone on like a bit of a bad run. I don't think any side potentially has lost back-to-back games in the top 7, which is just ridiculous. Coming on to 6th place then, have you gone for Scunthorpe, or do you think there'll be a change?
Yeah, no, I have. So we kind of swapped them around, haven't we? 6, 7, 7, 6 is... listen, I've gone with the Scunny in 6th. They've got that cushion. They've got a good manager. They've got momentum. Only losing 3 games in the first half of the season is going to give them a huge amount of of a boost in terms of going into the second half. Like I said before, I think they're going to be a team that needs to rely on loan deals maybe more than some of the others in the top 7. That may be what causes them to drop off or actually improve. But you've got to be able to recruit when you're on top and you're in a position of strength, and that's what Scunthorpe are at the moment. They're a good proposition to any young EFL or Premier League loanee that wishes to come in, or even one that's out of favour in some of the lower leagues in League 1, 2 or 3, League 1 or 2, even a champ. So yeah, I just think because of their form and the fact they've got that many points ahead, I think they're just going to sit comfortably in 6th. What they don't want to do, Luke, is they're going to need to want to push on. We don't want to see what Forest Green did last year and sort of stagnate that little bit, and then you end up in the playoff positions, having to go into the knockout phases, and it's getting yourself up for it and everything else. So I think Scunthorpe will want to try and push on for 5th place, 4th place, and get as many points as they can naturally. But you don't want them to stagnate. Whereas I don't think Southend will. They'll push on, and then the top 5 above are going to sort of have a blooming bum fight as to who comes in that top 5.
Yeah, I've gone for Southend then. Only 18 goals conceded all season. They've actually got the second best defence, I should say, in the division behind Rochdale. Southend, it feels like when it comes across with the fan base, they're quite underwhelmed with the start, to be honest, because they are seventh. I think everyone thought they'd kick on from last season. I think they actually have. I think, they're still very strong defensively, and I think they are actually better going forward. I'm not saying they're perfect. There's been a number of occasions this season where, they probably haven't created enough chances or been able to put the ball in the back of the net. But I think they have improved on the previous season. And, at the moment, they're projected to get over for 80 points, which is a major improvement on last season. And I still don't think they've got out of second gear. I think Southend are the sort of side that could go on a massive unbeaten run. The thing that's let them down compared to the other top seven, and is why they're not probably in a title race, is because they've not performed well enough against sides around them, which is surprising considering how they've done against the better sides in previous years. But, I don't think they've actually beaten anyone inside the top seven so far this season. But I do think that is something that could change in the second half of the season. I think defensively, as I've mentioned, very strong. I think they can certainly improve on the forward front, and I think they've got the ability to go out and recruit. And that's why I've got them in sixth place. But Southend and Scunthorpe, for me, those two are sides where you could have probably put sixth or seventh. It didn't really matter, I don't think, to be honest. I think they'll both be very close to each other, if that makes sense. And moving on to fifth place, who have you gone for?
Forest Green Rovers. Listen, Robbie Savage is, he knows his football onions. This National League is a tough league. I just feel like they're not scoring enough goals, and that might be the problem. Listen, they went and got Ricardo Reese from Merthyr Tydfil Town. He scored 2 on his debut. Brilliant. What a great acquisition that could be. Could he be the next Ollie Pearce, the next Jamie Vardy, that sort of thing? We don't know. Robbie Savage has gone and taken a bit of a punt on him, if you like, at this stage of the season. It's still a big call, isn't it, to grab someone from the National League North and to sort of come in. They've got Temi Adebola up top as well. So he's got a lot of players that he's brought in from the lower leagues. And listening to his last presser, he was hugely frustrated. I think they lost to Truro, didn't they? And he's sort of suggesting that some of them, aren't up for representing Forest Green, or is the Forest Green shirt a bit too much for them, that type of thing. So, he's going to go and look at trying to remodel his squad. But I just look at Rochdale, Carlisle, Boreham Wood and York, and I just think they're just that little bit stronger overall. And Forest Green will comfortably be in the playoffs, but I think they'll just finish in that fifth place.
Fifth for myself, then, I've gone for Boreham Wood. Again, could be one where it's a bit of a drop-off, which people don't really expect. The reason is, I think what we've just seen is Jeff King's been recalled to York City, of course. He's been key for them. Something that interests me as well is Abdul Malik, whether he's going to stay in January. He's certainly going to be watched. And although he's under contract at Boreham Wood, if a Championship or League One side wants to bring him in for one for the future, I think it's going to be hard for Boreham Wood to say no, particularly if they ask for a good fee. Or, it's going to be hard, I think, for Boreham Wood to stand in Abdul Malik's way, to be honest. And something else to mention, they've got the smallest squad in the league, which I know Luke Garrard has come out and said that he likes having a small squad. But that's got its pros and its cons. And in the second half of the season, as I keep alluding to with different sides, injuries kick in. That means, key players in the starting 11 are going to drop out, and you're going to have to be bringing in players quickly from loan who you may not fit into the system, or you may not know enough about. And for me, overall, I like Luke Garrard. I think he's an excellent manager, to be honest. I think he's a top 3 National League manager, certainly for me overall. And, he's done very well with this squad. But, if the likes of Jeff King, as we've seen, has been recalled, Abdul Malik, maybe on his way out, who knows, to be honest. And there's certainly other individuals in that squad that teams will be looking at. I think it's going to be a very interesting second half to the season. They've done exceptional so far this season. I think if you actually watch them, if they kept that squad together and there's no injuries, I think Boreham Wood, to be honest, would be in a title race. I genuinely do when I've seen them play so far this season. But I just think it might be a bit much of an ask. And I think the second half of the season is when you see your Forest Greens, your Carlisles, your Yorks become even stronger because they've got strength in depth. They won't get affected by injuries in the same way other sides will. And they'll be able to bring in, key, top-end National League players. And although I think Boreham Wood, have the opportunity to bring in their own players, I don't necessarily think they'll be able to do it to the same extent as a Forest Green, as the same extent as a York, if that makes sense. And, that might be another one that comes back to bite me, to be honest. But we'll move on to fourth place. Who have you gone for?
I've gone for Rochdale. Now, they've got lots of games to catch up. They're not scoring as many as some of the other teams. They've got the issue with their pitch and having to play away from home. And I just think it might catch up with them. Very good football inside. Having seen them this season, I think we both agree that they're probably one of the better football insides in the league. But I just feel at this stage that York, Boreham Wood and Carlisle will be stronger than Rochdale. And I know we talked about points on the board and games in hand. They've got to make up 4 games on Forest Green. They've got to make up 2 games on York, 4 on Carlisle, which is great. But they're going to be playing Saturday, Tuesday. They're going to be playing away from their familiar stadium. I think, again, that might just cause them a bit of bother going forward.
Interesting, to be fair, on that one. I've got my thoughts on them shortly. My fourth place, I've gone for Forest Green. I actually, with Forest Green, which they will, maintain a top 7 finish, I fancy Forest Green in the playoffs. But it just feels like they've got so much depth there in quality, yes. But it still doesn't feel like Robbie Savage always knows his best 11 because he's got so much quality. They still go out and recruit. And we've seen in games, they're not starting well. But one positive thing I will say about this is they're not starting well in certain games, but then they've got that ability to completely change the way they play in the second half. Against Halifax, I've seen it twice now where, the first half, Halifax were probably the better team, were 1-0 up or 1-1. And the second half, they've come out and they've made a few changes in the 60th minute and they're a completely different team and they go on to win. And I think that's a massive, massive plus for a side that's wanting to compete towards the top at the moment. The concern for me with the title race is it just doesn't, like I've mentioned, it feels like there's a bit too much strength in depth. I think they drop a lot of points because there's a lot of changes. They win a game, they'll then go and change it. And I just don't think it's always necessary. And for me, I look at Forest Green, to be honest, overall, and I like them as a squad. I think in the playoffs, I actually would fancy them. But I just think in the next stage, have they got the same quality that some of the sides above them have? For me personally, no. And of course, I'm sure Robbie Savage, if he watches this, will be wanting to completely prove us all wrong now. But, for me personally, looking in, I think there's 3 teams that are better than Forest Green, if I'm honest, overall. And that's why I've got them in 4th place. Third place, then, who have you gone for?
Carlisle United.
We've agreed on one.
Yeah, they're just a powerhouse, aren't they? They're set up to do, to do well. They've got a proven manager across through national teams right the way through the leagues. They're currently top. I know they've played more games than most, but they are 2 points clear after a little bit of a bump in the road. I think their fans probably weren't overly impressed with them a couple of weeks ago, but they've come out the back end of that. They're not letting a huge amount of goals in. I think the one criticism of Carlisle was the fact that they were very much pushing on wanting to be good going forward and being better than other teams going forward. But was their defence okay? I think they're going to be in a position to be able to recruit in January, February time when others aren't. And they'll probably be in a position to be able to look at what they can go and get from potentially higher leagues as well. So, I've gone for them in 3rd place. They could easily drop into that anywhere in that top 3, but I'll go on to why I think they'll be third rather than second or first. So there'll be a strong showing in third place.
The only thing about Carlisle with the first half of the season, been a bit patchy, haven't they? Had a reasonably good start, then lost a couple of games or dropped points against teams they probably shouldn't. But then they go out and, go away to Southend and defeat them. So they've been, I think, against the sides around them, particularly inconsistent, I feel. But, since Con Clark came into the side, there was a massive improvement in them. And I think it's crucial that they extend his loan or sign him on a permanent. And, we're yet to know what's going to happen with that. Of course, he's been out injured at the moment. Of course, left back, I think that's a position that they're looking at to try find a replacement for or find someone to come in and strengthen them. And I think Ryan Galvin, who's just been on loan at Rochdale from Barnet, I think they're actually looking to go out and sign him. So that would make them even stronger, and this is something about, I think, Carlisle overall, is that I feel that they've got the ability to be able to bring in top end National League players to be able to strengthen them, and that's why I think as the season goes on, they're a side that will get stronger and stronger as we progress into the latter stages of the season. But I just don't think overall that's the current squad, and even bringing in players is to the same level as the sides above them, which are the two sides for me that I think when I've seen them so far this season, I think the sides above them are the two sides that consistently over the first half of the season, when I've seen them, I think on paper the two strongest sides in the league. And we'll come on to them shortly. So who have you gone in second place then?
I've gone for Boreham Wood. They're a tough team to beat. I saw them on Boxing Day, and they were very, very good. Very, very good football team. They were able to be efficient. They were quick on the break, going from defence to attack. They've got the threat out wide. Abdul Malik, as you say, is one. They got the lad in midfield, got his head.
Zach Brunt might have been.
They got Zach Brunt, who sort of plays further forward, and then what's the bloody lad's name? Played up north.
Regan Booty.
Regan Booty. Pulling the strings. Very, very good goalkeeper in Ted Curd on loan from Chelsea, who many believe will go on to be, have a really good career higher up the DFL or Premier League table. So, I think they're just a very, very good football team, Luke, and they do everything right, both defensively and attack. They are going to lose Jeff King, as we've sort of stated, to York.
I think what's interesting as well, just to cut in, is Regan Booty as well. His loan is going to actually expire on the 21st of January, back to Barrow. So that could be interesting as well to see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, if he's based in Barrow, or he's up north, will not so much York, but will Carlisle look to sign him if Con Clark is struggling? Will Rochdale look to sign him if by signing them, they're strengthening them and weakening a team that are likely to be up there? Or do Barrow, who've got a new manager now in place, do they take him back to assess him in their team for their EFL campaign? So, I think Boreham Wood will got to be careful that they don't have that type of issue Gateshead have, where players are picked off or players are returned back to their parent clubs. But they're in a really strong position, Boreham Wood. I think that they are a really, really good football team, Luke. I can't stress that enough. I was highly impressed with them. Probably the best team I've seen in this league so far. But they're coming up against someone like the Yorks and Carlisles. It's still going to be difficult for them.
Second place for me is Rochdale, and for similar reasons to you, I don't think they'll go on to win the title. They're currently playing the games at Accrington. Ironically, the game was actually postponed, wasn't it, at Accrington when they've moved there to try be able to play their games. Of course, most games were called off. And, they're already playing catch-up, having to play games away from home. It's not ideal. We saw the Hartlepool game in Accrington, they lost that. Would they have lost that game if it was actually played in Rochdale? I don't think they would have done, if I'm being honest. And I think, as the season goes on, I know they're looking to relay the pitch and everything, but in the short space of time, how much of a difference is that going to make to games not being postponed? And at this stage, having to play catch up, we're already seeing they're actually currently fifth because they've got that many games in hand. But if they win them all, they will actually go top with a bit of a gap, I think 6-point gap if they win them all. But, I'd rather have points on the board. And I think Rochdale fans would as well. And Rochdale is a football club. And, having to cram games in, even the games they currently have at the moment, they're going to be played on Tuesday nights when, other sides are not playing, which means it's going to have an after effect on the Saturday when other sides are fresh and they're not. And I think when I look at them compared to York, who we've both gone on to actually win the title, they're more settled, York, I think, overall. They're not going, they've not had issues like this overall. And also, I just think in terms of actual quality as well, when I've seen both sides, I just think York have that little bit more depth and quality. Rochdale certainly do as well. I think they play very nice football, but I don't think it's to the same extent as York. I think York could probably put out 2 sets of 11s that would be, in the top 3 this season. I don't think Rochdale could, to be honest, overall. And, we mentioned the goals. They scored a fair amount, but it's not to the same extent as York. Yes, they've been strong defensively, but I just think for me overall, I just think York have got that little bit of an edge to them that I don't think Rochdale do. And I just think probably they're a bit further into the project as well, under the Uglers compared to the Ogdens. And that's why I've got York to win the title, which of course you also have as well. You're on mute.
Yeah. I think, when you look at the threat that York have going forward and quite obviously the goals that they're scoring, Luke, is, they're one of the first teams to score more than 4 goals in however many games in a row, etc. When they're on the front foot and they're in possession of the ball, they're going to look like they're threatening all the time. I think their Achilles heel a little bit will be just letting goals in early doors and having to chase the game when necessarily they don't need to or want to. But I'm pretty sure that will be looked at and addressed by Stuart Maynard in his coaching staff. But I think interestingly, when you look at the recall of loans as well, Luke, they've recalled Tyree Sinclair from Solihull, they've recalled Jeff King from Boreham Wood, and they've recalled Billy Chadwick from Scunthorpe United. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that they're going to have an impact on the team that Stuart Maynard or the squad Stuart Maynard puts out going forward, but he's sensibly looked to them and are they strengthening teams that are around us? And they probably are. So, that's how it is. They're a York City asset. He will do what he wants with them. He may be looking at them and going, actually, Jeff King will get in this side. Tyree Sinclair is another option up top. Billy Chadwick, not so much maybe, but, they're going to need bodies going forward. They haven't got the FA Trophy to worry about. Not that probably was a worry. So, I think they've quite a settled squad and quite a settled team as well that York have. And it's a big squad. When you talk about Boreham Wood being small, York have got a bigger squad. They've got quality across the board. They're not, they've released a player this week who hasn't really played too many games, but they brought a defender in from Sunderland that Stewie Maynard knew about from his Notts County days. So, I think they're just in a really good position. And I think what will really determine this top 7, Luke, is when they play each other.
Mm-hmm.
The results playing each other is going to be. We talk about that mini league at the bottom in terms of getting relegated. We've now got that mini league at the top, and these teams are relentless at the moment. And what's going to give is when they play each other. I mean, Boreham Wood were due to play York on Saturday, just gone. That's going to have to go to a Tuesday night under the lights at Boreham Wood. Is that an advantage to Boreham Wood? Who knows? It's that type of thing is going to occur over the next 4 months. But, I think York are just best placed because of that firepower they've got and the solidity they've got at the back and the way they play. That's why I think they'll be champions.
Yeah, for very similar reasons as well. That's why I think York will overall, and I just can't see past them. I had them to win the league at the start of the season, and I think they definitely will now, particularly under Stuart Maynard. I think, when I've gone to actually watch York and I've seen them play, and the way that they've been able to put sides like Rochdale to the sword, the likes of Carlisle to the sword, when they've got into their flow, I think that kind of tells you everything about them overall, is that the fact that they're a very dangerous side. And for me, I do genuinely think that they're just a little bit better than the rest of the sides around them, which might not look like much at the moment, but I think as the season goes on, it will. I think York had quite an underwhelming start, and I think since Maynard's come in and really got to grips with, what his starting 11 is going to be at York and knowing the club better, for me overall, I look at York and I think if you actually look at their form probably since October time, they probably would be top of the league. And for me, I look at York and I just can't really see past them, if I'm being honest. And I still think they will go on to win the league this season. And that more or less wraps up the first podcast of 2026 and our updated National League predictions. Paul, as always, thanks for joining me tonight.
No problem, Luke. Thanks for having me. It's it was good. It's interesting. I'm looking forward to that top 7. I'm not looking forward to the bottom 4 because I think Wealdstone might get drawn into it a little bit more than I would have thought, 2 or 3 weeks ago. But definitely looking forward to that top 7 battle, really, because there's some consistently good teams in there, and there's some blockbuster matches, if you like, in terms of who's going to determine where they finish coming up over the next few weeks that we have to talk about. Be good to see how the transfers go over the next few weeks. The likes of Jeff King and Billy Chadwick and Tyree Sinclair, as an example, coming back from York. Are they going to be used? Are those types of players going to be called back from other clubs? And who can these clubs go and sort of recruit to replace them? Because that's a skill in itself, is to use that loan market well. So it'll be interesting to see how the clubs do over the next few weeks in terms of reshaping their squads where they can. Got a couple of new managers in the league, so we'll see how the teams go with that. But looking forward to the next 4 months.
Please remember to like and subscribe, everyone. It genuinely does go a long way. And if you'd like to become a channel member, it is just £2.99 a month. Also, check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There's a link in the description for you to do that, and you'll get 50% off your card machine. That's more or less everything, so we will see you next time.